Well, as Judy mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Ann Carana, and I'm the Assistant Provost for Faculty Development and Diversity in Judy's office, and I join my colleagues in also welcoming you here today. We're just delighted that you're all here and that we're able to have this activity which will help you to have a better sense of navigating your life here at Harvard and also meeting some of your colleagues around the table. Some of you are familiar to me already, and I may be familiar to you because I worked on your recruitments in the FAS when I was there for about 10 years before moving into Judy's office a year and a half ago now. So it's nice to see you here in person as well. So we have our panelists. So if we want to bring our panelists up, and I'm going to introduce you. Andrew and Galit and Jal's on his way? Okay, so we'll get started, just in the interest of time. So we have two panels today. The first are two or three, soon to be three, associate professors at Harvard in various schools and departments who are going to talk about navigating life as establishing your reputation as a scholar within the context of navigating your career here. We thought it would be helpful, given their experience, that they could share with you some personal insights and perspectives about being a faculty member here, advice on those of you who are just starting your academic careers, especially regarding resources, mentoring, navigating Harvard in your department, managing workload and work-life balance, but also of you who may be more seasoned in your academic endeavors and that have transitioned to Harvard from somewhere else recently. So we have Galit Lahav, who's Associate Professor of Systems Biology at Harvard Medical School. Galit received her PhD in 2001 from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. In 2003, she completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. And in 2004, she joined the Department of Systems Biology at HMS. Her lab combines experimental and theoretical approaches to understanding cellular decision-making in individual cancer and healthy cells, and why cells vary so dramatically in their response to irradiation and drugs. Our second panelist, welcome Jal, is Jal Mehta, who's Associate Professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Jal received his PhD in Sociology and Social Policy from Harvard. His primary research interest is in understanding what it would take to create high-quality schooling at scale, with a particular interest in the professionalization of teaching. And we have Andrew Warren, who is the John L. Loeb Associate Professor of the Humanities in Harvard's Department of English in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Andrew received his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Dartmouth in 2001, his master's in English from the University of California, Irvine, and then his PhD in 2004, also from his PhD in 2009 from UC Irvine as well. He then did a postdoc at the National Tsinghua University of Taiwan in the Department of Foreign Literatures, and he teaches currently about literature and philosophy from the 18th and 19th centuries with a focus on romantic poetry. In your packets, you can read more about our panelists today, but that gives you sort of a flavor for their work and their focus and their passions. So now I would like to invite each of our speakers to talk for about 10 minutes about their stories and their experiences and advice for you, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Sound good? So We'll start with Galit.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thank you for the invitation to be here this morning. I'm very excited to welcome you all. And I was asked to talk about how navigating, your work as a scholar at Harvard for 10 minutes, which is one of the challenges someone asked for faculty at Harvard. How do you summarize it all in 10 minutes? And so obviously I won't be able to share with you everything that I've learned, but I decided to perhaps focus on three main messages that I would like to share with you, and also to share a few personal stories that made me this conclusion. So the three messages, I'm going to tell them right away and then zoom into each one of them. One is to stay unique. The second is to discover the power of peer mentoring. And the third is what I call the yes-no balance. So let's start with stay unique. So I was listening to each and every one of you when we went through around the room, and I was quite overwhelmed by the enormous talent and intelligence that probably exists in this room right now. And I think it's important to remember that each and every one of you was recruited to Harvard, not just because you were very successful and smart and talented, but also because probably you bring something new, something different to the department, the division, the institute, the school. And sometimes we tend to forget that, and we try to align ourselves according to the new place that we join instead of maintaining our uniqueness. And I feel this a lot because I'm in a very interdisciplinary department in systems biology, and I work with mathematicians and physicists and clinicians and computer scientists, and I'm always amazed how when we bring different people from different backgrounds to look at a problem, each one of them is looking at it from a completely different angle. And it's just, I think it's the beauty of doing research and teaching that actually people are doing that and our brains operate from a very, very different ways. And it's really interesting to see that. And of course, it's great to learn from others and to let them enriches you. But it's also important to really keep your uniqueness. And I want to share with you one personal story related to that. So a little after I started my position as an assistant professor, my department's chair scheduled a meeting with me. And he was at that meeting, and also another senior faculty from my department. And they said, we want to sit down with you, Galit, and we want to discuss what are your first goals for your first grant. If you can share with us your research goals and what are you planning to do in the next year or two or so. And they were very generous with their time. We scheduled a 2-hour meeting just to discuss my research goals, which is, it's really wonderful. And so I sat down and I shared with them, these are my first 3 aims that I'm planning to write for my grant, and this is what I would like to do. And they both got really excited and they said, you know, it's really interesting. But I have, they both said, you know, we have a few other ideas. And then for most of the time, they sit down and said, you should do that, and you should try looking at this protein, and why don't you do a little bit of biochemistry and in vitro study and this and this and that. And I was sitting there with these 2 really, you know, a senior, very smart, successful man throwing their ideas at me, which one could think is a, you know, is a unique gift, and it's wonderful. I could just take notes. And I was listening and listening. And then at the end of the meeting, they both asked me, so what do you think about all this? And I looked at them, and they still remind me that. I don't think they can never forget that. I looked at them and I said, you know what, these are all really good ideas, but I don't think I'm going to do any of this. And it really reflected how I felt at that moment, because, again, here are these 2 very smart people providing me ideas that are their ideas, that they fit their line of research for the last 20 or 30 years. And I wanted to do things a little different. My passion was in a different place, using a different approach. And at that point, I felt I'm no longer a trainee in someone else's group. Now I'm a faculty. I'm an independent investigator. There's a reason why the word independent is there, right? This is my opportunity to do things my way. And I kind of felt that I just can't do it any other way. Maybe I'm taking risks. Maybe by following their advice, it's a little safer. But I felt like that's the only way I can do it. And luckily, I did it this way, and it turned out it worked well for me. I think the message is not obviously to be stubborn and not to listen to anyone else or any advice that you're given, but is to be open, again, for the environment of the people around you to enrich you and to teach you, but to dare to stay unique, to dare to provide a different view, a different angle to your research, to your teaching, to the way you communicate with others, the way you educate others. I highly encourage you to keep that. The second message I would like to convey is to discover the power of peer mentoring. And I think all of us, when we, at least for me, when we think about mentorship, we think about a teacher and a student, or a chair, or a senior faculty and a junior faculty. And this is obviously very important, and we can learn a lot from that. But when I think more closely about mentorship, I think about it as a collective effort between people from the same rank. And shortly after I started my faculty position, I realized that, at least as scientists, we receive very little training about management and leadership. So I started to organize courses, series of courses for workshops for junior faculty, for leadership and for management. And one of the things that happened is that it created a really strong bonding between the junior faculty in my department and junior faculty in the medical school and in the hospitals. And we decided to establish the peer mentoring group. And so we met every other week for lunch. And we basically provided advice to one another. And it was either just sharing a very big challenge that one of us is currently having in their group, like an unmotivated student, or some conflicts about authorship with a senior person in their department. And having an environment that is supportive and a place that you can very openly and honestly share all these challenges. It was also a great place for collecting knowledge and providing advice on grant writing, on papers, on how to communicate with editors. At some point, we had a lot of discussion about revision of papers and communicating with editors. So we invited an editor of one of the journals that are in Boston to join our discussion and to give us some of her advice. And it was very non-formal, very low-key, very simple to organize. And I just highly encourage you, perhaps even at the end of the day today, to see if there are people around you in your department, in your school, in your division, that you can just meet up every 2 weeks or once a month for lunch, for coffee, and just use this platform to mentor one another. I don't think that this should be instead of the regular mentorship that is offered with senior faculty. I think that has its own importance, but I think it can be an addition because there's a big difference between the two. I think with senior people, their challenges are different. Sometimes they forget how it is to be a junior faculty at Harvard. Also, there is a delicate balance when you go and talk with the senior people that you want to ask for help and for advice, but on the other hand, you want to impress them and you don't want them to see you as weak or as someone that's having problems. So many times you're not completely honest about the different situations. So the peer mentoring really allow you to be yourself, to be vulnerable. And it's just also empowering. You know, in one of the meetings we met, and each one of us read out loud the most horrible rejection letter we ever got. Right? And just by itself, that's seeing that all these wonderful, talented people around you receive even horrible letters than you. It was really wonderful. And the last one, which I'm going to briefly say because I'm thinking I'm running out of time, is the yes-no balance. And I think President Faust mentioned that a little bit in her response to your questions. As a new faculty at Harvard, you're going to be requested to do a lot of things, and there is a tendency, at least at the beginning, to be excited and to want to contribute to the community and to say yes to everything. And my advice to you is take the time before you respond. If you're asked to do something, ask for as many specifics as possible. How many times a year this committee is going to meet? Am I supposed to write a report? How long is the report? Is this an area that I can make a unique contribution? Did you approach me because I have some knowledge in this field and I can contribute in a way that no one else can? How many lectures I need to give in this course? Take as many specifics as possible and then say, let me think about it, okay? Go back to your office, go back home. Think how it fits with everything else that you're doing. Think if this is something you're really passionate about. Think if there are all many other things that you're doing that are outside your research and teaching focus, and then make a decision. And if you decide to say no, really feel okay about it. It's not that you're saying no because you're lazy or you don't care. It's usually saying no because you just cannot fit it with your current schedule. And it's also, sometimes it's okay to say no just to get some free time. I think we're all pretty much caught in the idea that we're not allowed to have any free time, and any free time we need to use for work or for contributing to something we are asked to do. I actually think that free time is extremely important for our mental power, for our creativity. And so it's really okay not to work all the time. And I think researchers and educators can be wonderful actually taking some breaks, taking space, taking some incubation time. I was so burnt out at the end of 2013 that I decided to say no to the first 10 things I'm asked to do. I don't think it's a good strategy, to be honest. You have to put a lot of thoughts in each of any decision, but I just got to this point that I just couldn't say yes to anything else. And so be very careful about protecting your time. One last point. Throughout the day today, you're going to hear lots of different advice, and probably throughout your first years in Harvard, people saying you should do that, you have to do that. That's the most important thing. You really have to do that. The truth is that there's no one formula to how doing things right. So listen to all of them, and then pay attention to it, but then realize that if one thing might fit one person, it might not fit you. So you have the flexibility and the independence and the freedom to decide what advice to accept and what's not. And this is true for, I think, all kind of advice you'll hear today, and including this one. Thank you.
Great. Welcome. Sorry that I missed getting to hear a little bit about each of you. My son was sick this morning, and I was waiting for his grandmother to come to take over, so I'm sorry I was a little bit late. I also thank Judy and the Office of Faculty Development for inviting us here. I'm not quite sure. This is probably the first and only time that non-tenured faculty will be invited to give you advice on establishing a scholarly reputation. So I'm glad that that the standards were opened up and we were invited to this event. So I think I have a lot of overlapping themes. So the most important piece of advice I got came maybe a year or two into being a junior faculty member. I was talking to my best friend, Will, who's not an academic, but we've been friends since the first week of college. And I was saying, I got my PhD in sociology, and now I teach at an education school. And, the things that people know at this education school seem different than what I knew in sociology. And there are opportunities there because I'm learning about different disciplines. But what standards am I going to be judged by here? Am I going to be judged as a sociologist? Am I going to be judged as an education school professor? What are the standards? And he said, you're not a graduate student anymore. You're the professor. So you decide what you want to work on. And then if it's interesting, people will follow you. And it was a really kind of simple piece of advice from someone who's not in academia, just sort of thinking about his own professors in college and things like that. But I really do think it's right. I think as a professor, you are the originality of your ideas. And so that does mean departing in some ways, picking up on your theme, from advice of existing mentors. And sure enough, once I started to try out ideas of different sorts and kind of tried to see what resonated, in my case, there's an academic field, and there's also a broader sort of public policy debate that we contribute to. And just trying out different versions of my ideas and trying to figure out which ones really resonated was really powerful. And after a while, people actually, when you went to talk, people actually wanted to come. Like, it was no longer like, you'd written your dissertation and it had been read by your parents and your aunt and so on. You would show up and you would say, I'm here to talk about the failed professionalization of American teaching. And people would be like, tell me more about that. And so I really resonate with your first theme. Second point is comes from my colleague Bob Keegan. So he's a colleague at the Ed School. He studies adult development. So he likes to say the field of development. If you didn't develop as adults after 18, all you would be doing is putting on weight. And so Bob's written a book called In Over Our Heads. And the thesis of In Over Our Heads is that the experiences that you've had in life up to one point don't prepare you for what the next stage of life asks of you. So dating doesn't prepare you for marriage. Marriage doesn't prepare you for children. And essentially, we're all sort of muddling through in the next stage. And in that sense, I think it's true that graduate school in some ways prepares you to be a faculty member in that you've learned the standards of your discipline, you've learned how to analyze, you've learned how to make an argument. But you're also being asked to do a bunch of things that you haven't been taught how to do yet. Teach classes on your own, and particularly for the purposes of this panel, sort of managing a research agenda. So in a way, I think what we ask of graduate school students is really unreasonable, which is that they have kind of minimal resources. They're at the beginning of their developmental trajectory, but they have to contribute at least one thing to the top journal in their field with their sort of meager resources and their $20,000 fellowships and so on. And if they can create that thing, that's what gets them a job and gets them to a place like this. So in a sense, you've already done the hardest thing in that you've accomplished something significant with basically very limited resources. But when you become a faculty member, your ability to gather resources increases exponentially. And so with that comes, as you were saying, a number of skills around organizational management, leadership. I felt like, at least, this may be less true for people in the hard sciences, but I felt like in graduate school I was sort of a lone entrepreneur. And as a faculty member, I feel like I'm, running a small organization while I have another job, which is teaching my students. And so my only advice on that point is just to sort of accept that you're shifting roles. You can expand your capacity. You need to figure out what works for you. I do research of different sorts, and so when I'm doing qualitative research, I can send people to do interviews and observations in ways that extend my capacity. When I'm doing historical work, I've tried to have people summarize things and things like that, and I would say there's like a 70% tax on that. Like, for each dollar you spend, you're getting about 30% of the utility of if you've done it yourself. But still, you're helping students learn, and you're extending the pace at which you can do things. So you have to sort of figure out what the right rhythm is for that. For some folks in the humanities, you may never move towards this sort of a model, and that may be fine. But for a lot of folks, that movement will come. All right. A few kind of sort of specific things I think might be helpful. Dissertation to book for people who are in that camp. Writing a book after you've done it once or twice will become a sort of demystified process. I feel like when I was a kid, like the idea that you would write a book was a really kind of significant kind of thing, and you'd go into the library or the bookstore and you'd sort of gaze at the books and sort of be in awe of the people who'd written them. But once you've worked on one, you see it more as a process. You have an idea, you do the research, you develop an argument, you write a prospectus, you shop the prospectus around, you get reactions, you send in the manuscript, the reviewers send you reviews, you write a letter responding to the reviews, you revise the manuscript, you put out the book, you try to do some publicity, and then you start on the next one. And so it's just like, making a meal or anything else that you know how to do in life. There are a sort of series of steps, and if you pursue those steps with enough vigor and perseverance, it will eventually, assuming you have a good idea for your book, it will eventually yield something. Now, we could have a whole separate discussion about the difference between a dissertation and a book, but sort of my point from this perspective is that I saw it for a long time as this really sort of holy grail-ish sort of thing, and that really slowed me down. And then once I saw it as a sort of, there are a series of steps in this, as there are with a whole bunch of other things, it became a lot easier. Okay. I think that the peer mentorship piece is important. I remember in graduate school, I was in a writing group, and I saw the writing group as something which I needed to have sort of finished product to share. And I thought, unless it's good, I don't want to share it with my peers. And I've entirely flipped that model. If I have as much as like a page of chicken scratch, if someone is willing to read that page of chicken scratch and respond to it, I'm better off than before they read that. Now, to your point, I might not show my senior-most colleagues my most undeveloped ideas, but I do have colleagues, particularly at other universities, some of whom are senior, who will look at things that are in development, and really, I've gotten some of my best advice at the point of being in development of ideas. Is once you're finished, you don't really want feedback that much. You just want people to say that it's great what you produced. But when you're early on, you really do want feedback because you can change course and so on. So being fearless about sort of putting things out. And I also have a sort of writing partner, and we meet once a week, and we try to separate the kind of urgent from the important. So like once a week, it's not about our teaching or our committees or what everybody needs from us tomorrow. It's like every other week, since we're alternating, it's about what's happening with our research agenda and the way it's moving forward. And I find it really helpful to have that. Time check?
Maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Work-life balance, make some decisions that you can live with. I have kids, 1 and 4. 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. is their time. So I have a pretty simple decision rule, which is if you ask me to breakfast and lunch, I say yes. You ask me to dinner, I say no. And that works pretty well for me, and it will all depend on what works for you. But you can't, I don't know, I feel like in our 20s, we were in graduate school, and we were kind of thinking about what our life would be, and we were sort of putting a lot of things off because of what would come next and keeping our options open and so on and so forth. And that once you have kids, like, you're living your life. Like, this is your life, and it's only going to happen once. And so you can't, tenure here takes a long time. You can't put all of that off for 10 years and so forth. So you have to make some decisions that you can live with. Concretely, I would concentrate your teaching in 1 semester and give yourself time to research in other semesters. I used to live far away from here, which was actually really helpful because I lined everything up on the days I came in, and on the days where I didn't come in, I just went to the local library and worked on my writing. I have a program which shuts me out from the internet. Found that really helpful. I can pass that on if that is a problem for any of you. I wouldn't see teaching as antithetical to research. A lot of my best ideas have come through sort of testing out ideas, moving from the particular thing you're studying to trying to, once again, go back to the broader thing in which it's contained, which is what teaching does for you. And then the last point is that while this panel is about establishing your scholarly reputation, if you teach at the college, you have a mission which is to develop young people within a liberal arts tradition. And if you teach at a professional school, you have a mission which is to develop knowledge which is relevant for the field and to develop people who can contribute to that field. So if you think of all the things you need to do outside of your research as sort of part of a broader social mission you're contributing to, you'll feel less like it's just sort of taking away minutes that you should be spending on your research and instead see it as part of your job, which it is. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you to Judy and Elizabeth for inviting me to speak here. I know how helpful this really was for me when I was, a little bit younger, 4 or 5 years ago. And I think we're really on the same page. I think one of the most helpful things about these sorts of events is just seeing people in wildly different fields, right? In hospitals or research labs or law schools, encountering the same sorts of problems and issues that I'm encountering as someone who studies Romantic poetry. Okay, so establishing your reputation as a scholar. I'd like to divide the issue in twice, right? I'd like to divide it between what it means to establish your reputation outside of Harvard and what it means to establish your reputation inside Harvard. And I'd also like to divide the question between what it means to directly establish your reputation and spread your reputation, and what it means to, I want to talk a little bit about how you can indirectly establish your reputation. So because I think directly establishing your reputation outside of Harvard is kind of the most specific thing for all of us in each of our given fields, I'd like to focus on the other 3 aspects, right? Figuring out how to spread your name, spread your research here at Harvard, maybe within your department or in adjacent departments or more widely. And I'd also like to emphasize the importance of the indirect things, the things that aren't directly related to your research, because I think that keeps you healthy. I think both intellectually and perhaps even physically healthy, doing things that are only indirectly related to your specialty. And I think it also leads to connections with people. Indirect things often establish bonds and relationships that couldn't be established otherwise. So, yeah, I'd like to start with establishing your name at Harvard and establishing a reputation here at Harvard. So in the English department, I think we have a pretty good system. We have 2 mentors, and we meet with them pretty regularly, and they rotate. And this isn't something that I did, but it's something that that very smart departmental chairs have done. And we rotate through mentors, both as a way to get good advice from smart people with different perspectives, but also as a way of letting those mentors read your work and get to know you over time. And so a basic bit of advice is to try to figure out whether there is a system, and perhaps even to create a system where you can get people to read your work who are different, and get people to read your work across time, right? Because your work is going to develop. And often when I'll have conversations with people in the department, they'll say, oh, are you still doing this? And it was something I did 5 years ago, right? And haven't really thought about much since then. But that's your reputation. Your reputation isn't necessarily exactly what you're doing in the moment. It's this kind of vague, spread out thing that moves along with you. And you might be at quite a bit ahead of it, in a sense. So creating those sorts of systems to get people to update people on your work, I think, is important. And there's a few different ways to do it. I mean, one is to just present regularly if there's a workshop or a colloquium. There's a long 18th century and Romanticism colloquium, and I present something there every year, so the grad students and people in my field are up to date. But also there's interdepartmental sorts of seminars that you could present in, or something like the new faculty lunches run through the Humanities Center, where in my second year I presented there, and got a really different audience than I possibly could have gotten in the colloquium. And that audience was composed of not just people studying music or art history, and they gave me really great feedback, but people in my own department. I think one thing about Harvard is that we tend to latch onto a particular seminar, a particular working group, a particular little group of people, and we stay there a little bit. And so getting your name out means you have to visit a few different venues across the year and across a 5-year span. Okay, so yeah, let's see here. Oh, I'll also add one thing that I think that hasn't happened yet, but I think will perhaps be really helpful, and perhaps this is something that already happens in other departments, and it's just we in the English department are way behind. But after my 4th year review, it was suggested that we could bring in external scholars. We could set aside a little bit of money and set up some sort of workshop to go over my new book, to bring in specialists who might be interested in my new thought, and that I would also present to the department as a whole, right? And so I just ended a 4th year review, so that was the kind of way to update people on what I'm doing. And then this is my 5th year. And so it's another opportunity, again, to just advertise a little bit. I mean, you have to think about what you're doing as not just deep intellectual work, but also as kind of reminding people and advertising. There's a sort of basic way that functions in our work. Okay, so I'd like to talk a little bit about indirect ways of establishing your reputation. I think perhaps the easiest way to do it is just through teaching, right? A lot of my best work, I think, results directly from teaching, and results directly from teaching things that I didn't think were directly related to my first book project or anything I was hanging my hat on, or directly thinking of as my work. And I think we should think in that terms. I think you should trust your instincts, right? If you're interested in something, and it only seems like an indirect way to develop your thinking, that might become a direct something far more direct in the future. Also, I'll add that, right, time is finite, and we have to figure out what we're going to say yes to and what we're going to say no to. But and I think that's the central tension, deciding what's important to you and what isn't important to you. But again, I think you need to simply just trust your instincts and pursue things that are only tangentially related. So, for instance, I put on an exhibit at Houghton Library, and this was something that ended up taking a lot of time. It ended up taking, probably 5 or 6 times more time than I thought it would. And when people, there was a big conference happening here at Harvard, or here in Boston, and people asked me to do it. They said, "Oh, you're at Harvard, you've got a bunch of money, you can go put on an exhibit where you can show Keats's manuscripts and Blake's manuscripts and all of these great things that people around the world would want to see. Why don't you go do that," right? And this was something that I could definitely have said no to. And perhaps, it's still an open question whether I should have said no to this, I think. But I said yes, and it started creating relationships that I couldn't possibly have anticipated. People in my own department started taking their classes to this exhibit, so it showed a different side of me to them. And also people who I'd never met before said, who were specializing in some bizarre thing that I have no interest in, started conversations with me either over email or at the conference. And so there's these little connections, these little things that that can develop in unforeseeable ways. And I recommend you pursue those, right? You stay conscious of the fact that you only have a finite amount of time, but also if you feel something that is potentially productive, pursue it a little bit, right? Guard your time, but don't guard your time too carefully, I think. Thank you.